Good evening friends, once again today's question is causes of tribal unrest. I have given causes of tribal unrest. I have given this question for 10 marks. That means your answer must be in 100 to 150 words. And that too, this question is a specific question. In this question I have specified very clearly causes. Instead of causes, if they mention only tribal unrest, then you can write anything. Then you have to mention some recent tribal unrest or tribal conflicts, and after that you can mention the causes also, and finally you can suggest also what to do to deal with this tribal unrest. But here it is not so. Here it is very specific. The question is on causes of tribal unrest. That means in your answer 80% of the answer must be on the causes. Remaining 20% it can be in the form of introduction and conclusion. Okay. Then you can write introduction like this. You can write introduction in any manner, but my suggestion is you can write like this: tribal people lived in a relative state of isolation until the advent of the Britishers. Later, the tribal areas were opened up by the Britishers. Even after independence also, in the name of development of the tribals, the relative isolation of the tribal people came to an end. But because of the British policies, because of the independent Indian government policies, and apart from these, number of other factors have contributed for the development of discontent in the tribal people, which can be discussed as follows. In 3 or 4 lines you can complete the introduction. Tribal people lived in a state of isolation. The tribal areas were opened up by the Britishers and by the independent Indian government. During this process, number of factors have contributed to the development of discontent in the tribals. అంటే ఆ కాజెస్ ఎలా వచ్చాయి అనేది సింపుల్గా 2 లైన్లో తేల్చేసాం. They lived in a state of relative isolation. Later, the tribal areas were opened up by the Britishers and by the independent Indian government. During this process, number of factors have contributed to the development of discontent in the tribal people or unrest in the tribal people, which are as follows. There are many reasons, but in my opinion there are certain important reasons. If you mention those reasons, that will be sufficient. Sometimes question may be asked for 15 marks or 20 marks, then you have to elaborate. Content is same, but depending upon the marks allotted, you have to decide whether to give less explanation or more explanation. In my opinion, these are the important points. One is already introduction we have discussed, and in the causes, the first one is government failure. We have number of constitutional provisions for the protection and development of tribals, and at the same time number of legislative provisions also, but the government failed to implement all those provisions. That's why tribal people develop a lot of discontent. If the question is asked for 15 or 20 marks, then you can mention in the constitutional provisions what are the important provisions. 5th schedule provisions are there, 6th schedule provisions are there. They have provided for separate pattern of administration, but the government failed to implement it. Like that you can give detailed explanation, but this is for 10 marks. That's why briefly if you mention, that is sufficient. There are number of constitutional provisions and legislative provisions for the protection and development of tribal people, but the implementation of these constitutional and legislative provisions lies with governments. Governments fail to implement those provisions. That's why they develop lot of discontent. Simple. But if it is asked for 15 marks, you can give specification: 5th schedule, 6th schedule, then Land Acquisition Act, Forest Rights Act, like that you can mention. Otherwise you need not to mention. After that, indifference of government officials. Indifference of officials involved in tribal development. Indifference of officials involved in tribal development. Number of officials are involved in the implementation of all the welfare measures, but they have become highly indifferent towards the tribal problems. Apart from that, they started demanding bribes also. Indifference and corruption of the officers involved in tribal development. After that, unjust forest policies. Unjust forest policies. Especially the 1952 forest policy caused more harm to the tribal people rather than the British policy, British forest policy, that is 1894 forest policy. How we will discuss at a later point of time, but if you want to listen, I will explain. Total 3 forest policies are there. 1894 British forest policy, that means that is colonial policy. After that, 1952 forest policy. After independence, we got our government formulated one policy. British policy, they recognized at least the rights of the tribal people. They said that the tribal people can use the forest resources to meet their basic needs. Once the basic needs are satisfied, then the government will have the authority over the forest. But in the 1952 forest policy, it was not so. In the 1952 forest policy, it was, even at the time of announcement of 1952 forest policy, at that point of time in the parliament itself, the then agricultural minister, at that point of time forests were under the control of agriculture minister. The then agriculture minister at the time of introduction of that forest policy announced that the location of tribals in the forest is just an accident. Because of that accidental location, they can make better utilization of forest resources. యాక్సిడెంటల్గా వాళ్ళు అక్కడ పుట్టారు అంతే, కాబట్టి వాటిని ఎక్కువ వాడుకోవచ్చు. బట్ ఫారెస్ట్ ఆర్ ది నేషనల్ రిసోర్సెస్. ఫర్ ది సేక్ ఆఫ్ నేషనల్ ఎకనామిక్ డెవలప్మెంట్, ది గవర్నమెంట్ కెన్ రెస్ట్రిక్ట్ ఆర్ కెన్ టేక్ అవే ది రైట్స్ ఆఫ్ ది ట్రైబల్ పీపుల్ ఆన్ ది ఫారెస్ట్. అకార్డింగ్లీ దే బ్యాన్డ్ షిఫ్టింగ్ కల్టివేషన్ and they restricted the rights of the tribal people with respect to usage of forests, and they introduced a separate forest department for the sake of scientific, the so-called scientific administration of the forest. They the forest officials restricted the rights of the tribal people. They recruited contractors for the sake of rapid exploitation of the forest, for the sake of rapid economic development of India. But because of collusion between forest officials and the contractors, what happened? The tribal people were exploited. If it is asked for 20 marks, you can give this much of explanation, otherwise not necessary. Even later we realized the problems because of 1952 forest policy, then we announced another forest policy, 1988 forest policy. But all those things are not necessary. This is a 10 marks question. Just write that because of unjust forest policies, the tribal rights on the forest were not recognized. That is sufficient. Especially according to 1952 forest policy, the government can take away the rights of the tribal people for the sake of national economic development. Over. And after that, land alienation. Land alienation. For the sake, government acquired land for the sake of establishment of industries, and at the same time for the sake of construction of hydroelectric projects, by citing development as the reason, without providing for proper compensation and proper rehabilitation and resettlement. That's why they develop a lot of discontent. If you go into details, lot of explanation is there, but all those details are not required. Comparatively, we can discuss 1894 Land Acquisition Act and 2013 Land Acquisition Act. According to 1894 Land Acquisition Act, government can acquire the private property by citing public purpose as the reason. But what is that public purpose? It was not defined in 1894 Land Acquisition Act. How much compensation? It was not mentioned, just based on the discretion of the administrative officials. And apart from that, land for land policy was not followed. In the olden days, just compensation, no resettlement and no rehabilitation. Government doesn't have the responsibility of resettlement and rehabilitation. ఇవన్నీ కూడా డీటెయిల్గా రాయాలనుకుంటే రాసుకోవచ్చు. బట్ సింపుల్గా ఇక్కడ ఏం రాస్తారంటే గవర్నమెంట్ అక్వైర్డ్ ల్యాండ్ బై సైటింగ్ డెవలప్మెంట్ యాజ్ ద రీజన్. ఇన్ ది బ్రాకెట్ hydroelectric projects, industrial projects, etc. That's it. And after that, exploitation by money lenders. Exploitation by money lenders. Tribal people were exploited by the money lenders, and apart from that, because of inadequate application of the provisions of the 5th schedule, because of inadequate implementation of different laws, government failed to prevent the exploitation of the tribal people by the money lenders. Over. In 2 lines we can complete the explanation. After that, political indifference. Political indifference. The tribal people, the national level leadership of different political parties, they used to discuss the tribal problems only at the time of elections. Once the elections are over, they forget about the tribal problems. And apart from that, lack of efficient tribal leadership. Lack of efficient tribal leadership. Lack of efficient tribal leadership. Because of lack of efficient tribal leadership also, their problems are not represented in the legislatures. That's why government is not able to cater to the requirements of the tribal people. After that, forceful cultural impositions, conversions. Forceful cultural impositions. Forceful cultural impositions. And finally, pseudo-tribalism. These are the important causes for the development of discontent in the tribals. If you keep on writing, you can get many other causes also, but these are the major causes for the development of discontent in the tribal people. మీ మైండ్లో ఎట్లా ఉండాలంటే, in your answer, these are the fixed points, 9 points are there. If you want to add one more point to make it 10 points, you can add. But in my opinion, these 9 are the important points. In your mind, these 9 points must be there. Then depending upon the marks allotted to that question in the examination hall, you have to decide whether to give more explanation or less explanation. If it is asked for 10 marks, in 10 sentences you can give explanation. If it is asked for 15 marks or 20 marks, then you can explain. Anyway, whenever you are studying the tribal India, whenever you are preparing the tribal India, you will study what is the impact of forest policies. Land alienation is there as a separate topic in your syllabus. Then exploitation by the money lenders as part and parcel of poverty and indebtedness will study, and political indifference also will study, and lack of efficient tribal leadership will study. Whenever we study these ethnic conflicts, will study. And forceful cultural impositions, impact of different religions on the tribal people. Pseudo-tribalism is also a separate topic. That's why anyway we are going to prepare all these topics in detail. That's why you will have enough information. That's why depending upon the need of the question, we have to decide whether to give more explanation or not. If you are given the option to write 1 page about pseudo-tribalism, you can write. But here pseudo-tribalism is just a point in this answer. Am I correct? Number of causes are there. That's why if you mention briefly about pseudo-tribalism, that is sufficient. The non-tribal people are claiming identity like that of tribals, and they are getting benefits because of reservation. That's why the tribal people are deprived of the developmental benefits. That's why they have discontent. Over. But if the 10 marks question is asked on pseudo-tribalism, then we can write number of examples also. Okay. That's why here we must have that structure in our mind. Total how many reasons are there for tribal discontent or tribal unrest, and depending upon the number of marks allotted, we have to decide in the examination hall itself whether to give more explanation or less explanation. You know, for 10 marks you have to write answer in 100 to 150 words. For 15 marks 200 to 250 words. For 20 marks 250 to 300 words. That's why, and you have to calculate based on your handwriting and the pattern of writing. You must calculate how many words are there in each sentence based on your handwriting, and how many lines you are writing, and in total an average in 1 page how many words you are writing, you must calculate. Then accordingly, every time it is not possible for us to calculate line by line. For one person, based on his handwriting and way of writing, for one person in 1 page he may write 100 words, another person may write 150 words. Accordingly, we must calculate. The person who is writing 150 words in a page, then for whenever he is writing answer for 10 marks, his answer must be in 1 page only. But those people who are writing 100 words in 1 page, those people must write answer in 1.5 page, but not 2 pages. 2 pages means 200 words. Your time will be killed. That's why you must have that understanding. Assess yourselves based on your handwriting, based on the way of writing, how many words that you are accommodating in one page. Accordingly, you have to decide. If you are writing 100 words in one page, then for 10 marks question, your answer must be in one page or 1.5 page. And for 15 marks, 2 or 2.5 pages. For 20 marks, 3 pages or 3.5 pages. Like that, you must assess. And you will have, definitely you will have enough content, but based on the marks allotted, you have to decide whether to give more explanation or less explanation. Okay. And if you want to give examples, you can give examples also, but don't try to explain the examples, because this is a 10 marks question, you have almost 10 points. That's why just a passing reference, just mention the name, that is sufficient. You need not to explain with the help of case study. This is 10 marks question, case studies are not required, just mention the name, that is sufficient. Okay. Now you can bring your answer sheets.